I'm Marcus Smith, and this is Constant Wonder. Join us as we quest for the awe and wonder of knowing we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. Your host for this episode is Tennery Taylor.
Harriet Tubman is often characterized as if she were a member of some mythic band of heroes, the abolitionist Avengers, co-starring Frederick Douglass. That's a characterization I'm borrowing right now from our guest for this episode, Harvard historian Tiya Miles. It's kind of a charming thought to see Harriet Tubman that way, but it's not actually helpful.
All of these Avenger-like movies that I've watched with my kids, after a while, the stories start to feel kind of hollow, right? You kind of know what's going to happen. You know they're going to save the day. Even if they've gone through a very dark period with Thanos or whatever his name is, you know they're going to make their comeback and they're going to make their stand. I felt like Harriet Tubman was a figure kind of like those characters who we think we know what's going to happen. We think we know what had already happened with her. We think we know her. We think we know what her, superpowers might be.
Professor Tiya Miles is the author of Night Flyer, Harriet Tubman and the Faith Dreams of a Free People. Harriet Tubman is, of course, a storied figure in the American saga, a fearless abolitionist, a wily operator on the Underground Railroad. She smuggled about 70 people out of slave states into Philadelphia and even farther north to freedom. And yet, despite the fact that we learned all of this in our history classes, I think our assessment of Harriet Tubman has fallen short. Tiya Miles maintains that we've overlooked a deep spiritual richness in Harriet's life. And at the same time, she sees Harriet as one of us, a regular person, no superpowers.
She doesn't have superpowers. She's a regular person just like you and me. I really felt that by seeing her as a hero in the superhero kind of format, that we were denying ourselves the opportunity to get to know her as a person. And by doing that, we were actually limiting our potential to see her as a model or an example. Because if you think that somebody who did remarkable things was a superhero with unknown powers, then how could you ever imagine that you could do that? I wanted to see her as someone who had feelings, emotions, who had a complex psychology, who lived in and with a body, who could be hurt, who was hurt. It's also seeing the ways in which she was able to find sources of inspiration and strength and guidance, even in the darkest of times.
Even as a small child, Tiya Miles could train a historian's lens on the world around her.
When I was a little girl, my parents divorced, and my mom and I lived in a neighborhood in Cincinnati, which had a lot of abandoned buildings in it. I would go into these structures and look at the architecture of the buildings, look at the glass and the debris, see what I could find, maybe an old bottle from decades or centuries before. And I would just try to imagine who had lived there. That is a form of historical engagement or even historical imagination that I would never have called history.
In the last couple decades, the grown-up Professor Miles has cast her net wide to capture the way women in the past have related to nature. She's also authored a book titled Wild Girls. It explores how the American landscape has energized and inspired women in the past. We won't get into those stories here, but Tiya Miles started researching Harriet Tubman as part of that project. And Harriet's story just wouldn't leave her alone, even after Wild Girls was off to the presses. So she kept digging into Harriet's life, and her efforts have yielded rich fruit. In her fresh take on the life of this abolitionist, Tiya reveals that Harriet loved the out of doors. And, as we'll discover later on in this episode, that nature for Harriet was all wrapped up with spirituality.
She grew up on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Dorchester County, Maryland. And this was an area that was very water rich. It was shaped by the bay. And the water was actually a little bit brackish. There's a little bit of salt water mixed in with the fresh water there. Lots of streams and creeks running through the land in addition to the large water body. Forests, especially pine forests, loblolly pine forests, were abundant. And of course, there were also cleared areas with agricultural fields that were owned by the farmers and in some cases, the larger plantation owners in the area. So it was a beautiful area, which had quite a lot of diversity in the ecology there and in the landscape. I was actually surprised when I went out to visit for the first time in researching this book at how rural that area still is.
How did Harriet learn to survive? And I'm not going to say like in the wilderness, but in outdoor spaces when she was just a child. She had some experiences which, first of all, show her personality and resilience, but also would have taught her some things about surviving outside.
Yes. Well, Harriet Tubman had to work outside. As an enslaved child, she was put to work by her enslaver, who was also her mother's owner enslaver, and the people he leased her to.
How old are we talking?
Kindergarten age, ages 5, 6, 7, 8, very young.
Wow.
She's leased out by the person who legally owned her, leased out to local-ish individuals, maybe 3 miles away, 5 miles away, 7 miles away. But for a 5-year-old, that's a huge distance to be separated from your mother, separated from your family. And in many of these assignments, she was placed outside. One of the earliest times that she was sent away, she went to a family whose last name was Cook, and she was assigned the task as a very small girl of collecting muskrat carcasses, so dead muskrats, from this man's metal traps that he had placed because he was a muskrat hide trader. So she's a little girl walking in that brackish water we were just talking about. Oftentimes that water would be cold. She had no shoes, and she had to take these dead animals out of traps. It's really difficult to project ourselves back into past times, to imagine things that historical figures experience, and we never can do it exactly. But I can say that we have dogs, and we have had dogs who have killed animals in our yard of various kinds.
Same at our house.
Okay. And like some of them are very, very gnarly, right? And I have been the person who has needed to take care of these animals. And I, as a grown woman, have been just really, really disturbed by this. And here we have a small girl, different time period, yes, different place, yes, but still dealing with dead animals. She became very ill during this placement. She was so sick that she was close enough to death. The person who had leased her sent her back and said, she's no good to me anymore. At which point her mother, whose name was also Harriet, nursed her back to health. And what their owner would do, his name was Edward Broadus, is he would basically wait until Harriet's mother had renewed her strength, and then he'd just lease her out again. So these outdoor placements were extremely dangerous. They were basically sapping her health away from her. And yet they were also learning experiences. She was outside a lot. And she would have observed what was out there with her, what kinds of aspects and elements and creatures were making up the nature around her, how the weather shifted, how light and day, and dark and night shifted. And she was filing these things that she observed away to later apply them.
I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Down by the riverside.
So also when Harriet Tubman was a small girl, same age range, being leased out, she was sent to a woman who was looking for a babysitter for her infant on the cheap. This woman's referred to as Miss Susan. And Miss Susan was very violent. According to Harriet Tubman's memory, she had gotten a hold of this small child, again, kindergarten age, first grade age, to take care of her infant. And Miss Susan would sleep with a whip under her pillow because if the small Harriet allowed that baby to cry, Miss Susan would punish her. So Harriet started to, she was so smart, just so smart, Tennery. She would start to pad her clothing and wear layers and layers of clothing in that household because she knew that she was going to be abused by the woman who had leased her. And on one occasion, Harriet saw that the people who were leasing her, and she referred to all these people as her master. So if I use that language later, it's going to be referring to her legal owner and the people who leased her. She referred to them all as master. So she saw some lumps of sugar in the household of this particular family. And, what little 6 or 7-year-old do you know that has the kind of impulse control?
No one in my house. No one in my house.
Of course not. No. So she sees these lumps of sugar.
Yeah.
She wants the sugar, and she tries to sneak one, at which point the woman of this household and her husband run after her. And Harriet Tubman knows that she's going to be beaten. And so she runs. She runs from that household. She runs to the next farm and the next farm and the next farm. Then she comes across a farm where there's a pig pen, kind of a barricaded area where there's a mother pig and several piglets. And she climbs into that pig pen as a small girl and lives there for about half a week, for like 4 days, eating the pig's food. And she only goes back to this abusive household when she becomes so frightened that the mother pig, or the old sow, as she refers to her, seems like she might have had enough of a little human child taking her piglet's food. And so she finally goes back to the household. She does face that beating that she expected. And she says that she bore the scars for the rest of her life.
Incredible. There were other instances when she would slip out, not to run away, but to slip out to visit her mother.
Yes.
And I think she's a little bit older at this point.
That's right.
Now, in 2025, we did an episode about the Leonid meteor shower. And we discussed what an impact it had on enslaved people. Just tell us briefly what happened and the effect that it had on Harriet, her family.
So, from a very young age, Harriet Tubman became used to the outdoors. She was fairly independent. She knew how to take care of herself. She knew how to look for danger. She knew how to get food outdoors. She knew how to navigate. And by the time she was a pre-adolescent, she was used to running away for short periods of time at night to visit her mother. And on one of these occasions, she was one of many enslaved people, and many people across the country, enslaved or free, across different racial, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, who witnessed this Leonid meteor shower of 1833. And what it looked like to them was a massive amount, like hundreds of, thousands of stars raining down from the sky. It was an incredible sight that made many people feel like it was the end of the world. And that led them to do, all kinds of dramatic things to try to get right with God, really quickly before they face Judgment Day. We know that Harriet Tubman experienced this because the story of how she saw the stars and what she said was preserved in an obituary. And apparently, she was visiting her mother, and because she was sneaking out to do so, one of her brothers would stand guard to make sure that there was no one coming who would notice that she wasn't where she was supposed to be, take her back and punish her. And he apparently called to her to come out and see the stars. And so Harriet Tubman came out of the cabin and looked up and saw all of these stars just raining down to the sky. And many enslaved people remember this as the night the stars fell. Harriet Tubman was one of those people who thought it might have been Judgment Day. She thought it was a religious or spiritual transformation.
Did she give any indication that this changed her thinking or her motivations in life?
I have seen no indication in the stories that we have about her life, these biographies, that tell us what she thought one beat after she said, it looks like, the Judgment Day. But I find it very interesting that this event comes in a sequence of dramatic events that seem to transform her. So I can't say for certain, and I wouldn't venture to say that she took this to mean that she should take a certain path in life. But I can say that it is an indication for us of her religious frame of mind, and that as she continued to mature, that sensibility became just more and more intense for her.
You said it was part of a sequence of events. So what were some of the other events that stood out that would have kind of shaped a spiritual mind in Harriet Tubman?
To answer this question, I actually want to rewind our conversation a little bit to talk about something that I didn't mention when we were discussing her young years when she was leased out. Harriet Tubman would talk about how she prayed in the household of Miss Susan, that she prayed for God to help her. And she also prayed for God to make her strong enough to fight. She talks about how before she would pray, she would want to go off on her own. She'd want to go away from the family that was leasing her and find a little secluded spot. So this, to me, is just really, really interesting that even as a very small child, she had this notion that God existed. And she also had the notion that she could separate herself from the world around her in a sense and communicate with this God. She felt that she could ask this God for things. And what she asked for was protection.
I want to jump in here and explain something about how we've gotten Harriet's history. She herself never learned to read or write, but Harriet told her story to biographers during her lifetime. These biographers, often white, middle-class, abolitionist women, would then interpret what Harriet had said and publish their versions. I'm really struck by one account. Harriet told one of these biographers how she had asked God to make her strong enough to fight.
The woman she was talking with about this actually questioned her and challenged her as she was telling the story and said, basically, wait, you asked God to help you to fight? That doesn't sound right. And Harriet Tubman responded that it was absolutely right. And by implication, that the God of her belief would help, that he would view it as a good thing to protect and defend a small child, a small girl who's being treated this way, violently, abusively in this household. From her earliest years, she already had this sense that there was a God, that he listened to her, and that he would help her. And when she moved into her adolescence and to her teenage years, her understanding or her feeling that she had a very direct connection with this God was amplified. It's possible that seeing all those stars was some kind of a spark for that. Maybe she felt a sense of a greater proximity of this God, as she believed that the stars raining down was connected to his judgment. And then, not long after this incident of the meteor shower, she experienced a terrible injury at the hands of an overseer. And what happened here was she was again leased out to a different man in the neighborhood who had sent her on an errand with the cook on that farm. And they were both in the general store transacting some kind of business. While she's in that store, she sees that a young Black boy or teen is running. He's running across the fields. He's running toward the store, and an overseer is chasing him. Little boy runs into the store. The overseer follows, and Harriet Tubman herself, just an adolescent girl, probably around the age of 13-ish, puts her body in between the boy and the overseer. The overseer is trying to knock that boy down to gain control of him again. So he picks up a heavy weight, he throws it. That weight instead hits Harriet Tubman. She's the one who is knocked down, knocked unconscious, and has a terrible head injury.
And she's not a large person.
Oh, my goodness.
She's not the kind of person you think would put herself between someone.
She was so petite. So petite.
Do we know how tall she was?
Yes. One of my daughters is 5'2". And to me, this daughter seems pretty petite. Harriet Tubman was just under 5 feet tall.
Incredible.
Short, slight. And in this story, Tennery, she is not even fully grown yet, right? She's just an adolescent girl. So, I mean, we see already her courage and also her willingness to kind of act on instinct and to just go, to just do the thing that she feels she must do. So after this terrible accident, this terrible injury to her head, she experienced a shift in her mental processes. Scholars looking back on that moment have suggested that she was suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy.
Which would mean she would have seizures. Epilepsy, right?
Absolutely. She was having seizures, yes. She also had terrible, painful headaches after this moment. She experienced an intensification of her dreams. She'd always been a dreamer, but her dreams became much more vivid and much more intense and much more like they were giving her information about the future. That's the way she experienced it anyway.
Were these like visions or were they like nightmares?
Both.
Huh.
Both. So she would have nightmares about slave catchers, about white men on horseback, thundering into her community, attempting to steal people away. And she would also have daytime visions that were nightmarish, but that were sometimes informative. She thought she was getting information from them. So in this period of her adolescence, for all kinds of reasons that had to do with what was happening around her environmentally, atmospherically, because of this physical injury, because of her intensification of dreams and visions, because of her seizures, she was starting to feel much more religious. She was having dreams that were kind of geographical, in which she would see a bird or become a bird flying over the Maryland landscape and seeing the different changes in the terrain, which later on in her life, she would do exactly that on her 2 feet.
I think there's another part of that, those dreams where she would feel like she was falling.
Oh, yes.
And figures would. Will you tell us that part? Because that's so beautiful.
Yes, it really is. I interpret these as spiritual dreams. So she has a recurring dream, which is really a dream of escape. That was the dream of her lifetime, to get out of this place that she described as a hell. So she had a dream of escape. It was changing over time. And in it, she would often see the landscape, as we were just saying, and she would then see herself approaching something like a border. It might look like a fence, a physical divider. And on the other side of that divider, she would see these figures who she described as ladies in white or white ladies. She was hoping to be able to cross this border to reach them, but she never could. She would always fall right before she could cross it. So it was a dream that turned into a nightmare because by the end of it, she was back in this place that she described as hell.
Did she ever elaborate on who the white figures were?
Never. And it's so interesting to read the different accounts that she has given of these dreams, the figures kind of shift. So sometimes they're white ladies, sometimes they're ladies in white. The more I read and the more I came to see Harriet Tubman herself as a deeply spiritual figure, the more I came to interpret these figures as spiritual helpers, in a sense. So my first thought when I read about these dreams, Tennery, was she's seeing white women abolitionists. I took it pretty literally.
Oh, like white-skinned ladies, yeah.
Yes, yes. Because there were some of those, in her future life and in her orbit, and she would sometimes collaborate with them. But the more I read it, the more I interpreted it in this way, that these are actually spiritual figures, spiritual helpers of some kind, maybe they're angels of some kind, and that this bird who she sees flying, it's a white bird too, is actually her. It's her vision or picture of herself. But this is a self who has taken on all kinds of new powers, because this is a self who can actually fly and who can sustain flight. I mean, it is beautiful, just as you said, because in a way it's sort of, I wouldn't say it's literally a premonition, but it turns out that she is able to escape. And she does so in large part because of her spiritual strength, because of her faith.
Did she ever say these spiritual beings helped her get across?
She never said explicitly that they helped her get across, but I do see them as helpers. I see them as helpers in the way in which they offer encouragement. They're like beacons in a way. And I have to tell you something, Tennery. When I first started reading her dreams, the various different descriptions of them, I thought, and I even started to write this in a draft, I know I wrote this, that this was a fantasy landscape. Because in her dream, she's going over, rivers and meadows and also mountains. And I thought, there aren't mountains in Maryland, so this is a fantasy landscape. And then I did more research on the geography of Maryland. There are mountains in Maryland. She would not have seen them as a small enslaved girl, as an enslaved adolescent young woman, but they were there. Now, we can speculate in lots of directions as to how she knew there were mountains there such that her dreams would include these mountains. One of those speculations could be somebody told her. Another could be that these dreams were actually spiritually inflected in some way, such that she was able to see beyond what she rationally knew.
And you're okay by that?
Well, I'm saying that to you here in this conversation. I think anything is possible. When I wrote the book, I tried to be very careful about the ways in which I discussed religion or faith or spirituality. I certainly can't assert that God gave her vision and put mountains in it. I mean, there's no way to document that. And as a way to write this book, once I knew that it had to centrally be about Tubman's faith, because it was all over the record, it was just everywhere. One thing I arrived at was that when I wrote about Tubman, I would often describe the divinity as the God of her belief, as opposed to God.
Mm-hmm.
I did that to introduce that little bit of a buffer, that little bit of space, because when you read the record, you just have to scratch your head and think, what is going on?
Tiya Miles is a professor of history at Harvard. She's also the author of Night Flyer, Harriet Tubman, and the Faith Dreams of a Free People. When Constant Wonder returns in just a moment, I want you to hear how the labor Harriet Tubman performed as an enslaved youth set the stage for the courageous and selfless work she would accomplish in adulthood. I'm Tennery Taylor, and this is Constant Wonder.
Embark on a whimsical journey with The Appleseed and host Sam Payne. It's one of many shows from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. Wrap yourself in captivating stories, expertly woven by talented storytellers. You'll hear live studio audiences taking immense delight in a broad tapestry of tales, some humorous, others poignantly reflective. The Appleseed is always a family-friendly experience. It sparks imagination creative enough to make fiction feel like fact and bring real-life events back to life. The Appleseed. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder.
Let's talk about some of the work she did as an adolescent that may have prepared her for her future of leading escapees into freedom.
Mhm. Well, I have to go back and remind us of what it was like for her to work in the household of Miss Susan. Additionally, when she worked in the household of the Cooks, Mrs. Cook tried to get her to sew and weave. Harriet Tubman hated that domestic work. She didn't want to take care of Miss Susan's baby and be punished because she couldn't keep the baby from crying. And really, who can? And she didn't want to be inside the household with Mrs. Cook, having to do this feminized form of labor under the surveillance of Mrs. Cook. So even though we've talked about the terrible outdoor work she did as a girl, that outdoor work seems to have been preferable to her in comparison to indoor work. There was a little more room to move, a little more leeway in Harriet Tubman's experience. And when she was a teenager, she negotiated with her owner, her legal owner, to be able to lease herself out.
Huh.
We knew that we were talking about an incredibly smart, courageous little girl and teenager. We knew that.
Right.
But now we have someone who is so smart and courageous that she realizes that if she can get permission to lease herself out, she can maybe earn a little bit of money for herself, and she can also pick and choose where it is she will work. So she convinces her owner that basically, let me choose who I'm going to work for. And of course, her owner would get the bulk of the earnings, but she would get a little bit of the earnings. Her owner agreed to this, and she leased herself out to a man who was in the timber industry.
Huh.
Now, this, of course, was no accident. Her father, Ben Ross, who had been born enslaved, but who had eventually acquired his freedom, also worked in forestry. In fact, he worked at this very same place. So we see Harriet Tubman looking at her surroundings, understanding what needs to be done to improve her life and to come closer to kin. We always see her trying to get close to kin. So she ends up working under the direction of her father, who was the head of this logging crew. She was the only woman in this crew. And in fact, we're still talking about a teenage girl. And they were going into the woods and they were cutting down trees and they were hauling them back to the timber yard. She was doing the heaviest labor we could imagine. Just grueling, heavy, hard labor that was hard for men and just unbelievable.
And she's tiny.
Thank you. Yes. Unbelievable that a woman would be doing this, a girl, and yes, a very petite young woman was doing this. But she was doing it. We also have to add into our reconstruction of this time in her life that this is after she was knocked down by a heavy 3 or 4 pound metal weight and now had a terrible head injury and recurring seizures, which could be as frequently as every 15 minutes. She wanted to be free. But if she had to be anywhere, we see where she chose to be, and that was working with her father in these woods. We also know from, again, the account of somebody who talked with her, that she preferred the outdoors because the outdoors seemed to alleviate her symptoms. We don't know exactly how or why. I speculate that it could have been related in some way to a soothing smell of pine sap or a soothing, reassuring sound of bird song or the feel of the sun on her skin or the cool shade of the forest. But later on, once she had obtained her freedom, she said of this time that the Lord was getting her ready for the work that she was to do.
Well, let's talk about her decision to flee. because I think this ties in perfectly with what you were saying about the woods. What's the landscape they would have taken off into?
They would have attempted to move as quickly as possible out of the cleared and settled areas near the bay and to get into the woods as soon as possible because there was going to be more cover. They'd be shielded in the woods, and they would try to travel through the woods at night for as long as possible. It could take anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks to reach free soil, Philadelphia. So when Tubman decides to run, she is now in her 20s, probably in her late 20s. She was already married. She married a free Black man named John Tubman. And although they couldn't live together because of her state of enslavement, they did spend some time together, and she seems to have been attached to him. And she wanted to go north. She wanted him to go north. He apparently didn't want to make a move like that. And she was having these dreams, as we've discussed. And she was concerned that her enslaver was going to be selling her or selling other relatives. She thought that she had to get out. And she had a feeling that things are getting worse here. She just felt very pushed toward, I have got to get out. We have got to get out. Her husband, he thought that she may have been too in the thrall of her own dreams and her own visions. And yet a couple of her brothers did agree. And three of them, Harriet, Ben, and Henry, decided to make their escape in the fall of 1849. They made a good early start of it. They got into the woods. They were gone for days. And then her brothers decided they wanted to turn back. Not Harriet, her brothers. Now, we can't know exactly why, but one of them was already a father. And it's very possible that they didn't want to leave their other loved ones behind. But they all came back, and Harriet decided only a few weeks later to try again. And this time she went alone. This moment in her life is so incredible to me. I get caught up in my own imagining of it. I can see those woods, and I can see a 20-something-year-old Harriet Tubman. She's on her own, and she's somebody who is having seizures regularly, which means that she could fall unconscious in those woods and be at anyone's or anything's mercy.
So vulnerable.
Absolutely. You and I think that, right? But she seems to have felt that she had all these helpers in the woods.
My Lord, he calls me. He calls me. He calls me by the thunder. The thunder.
She told people that who wrote down her life story, that the forest, the woods seemed to be alive, that there was a vibrancy or an animacy, not just in the animals who were clearly very alive, and not just in the trees who were alive in their own way, but also in the rocks and in the stars. The forest seemed to be a place where there was a spiritual valence that she felt protected by. And so she navigated through the woods for weeks until she made it to freedom.
I haven't got long to stay here.
I want you to hear Harriet's own description of what freedom finally achieved felt like. Read by Tiya Miles.
I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees, over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven.
So beautiful.
That is Harriet Tubman in a nutshell. We see her actually becoming the Tubman that we are starting to know in a natural environment, which is beautiful and gold and warm. And to her, this glorious natural world is like being in heaven. And there's that spiritual element to her escape and to her whole story. For her, nature and God's presence, God's love are intertwined.
And there's a sense of connection. The light is not just shining on her.
Yes.
It shines on everything.
Yes. It's such a beautiful moment. it's a moment that is another time of courage for her, because once she knows she's on free soil and senses that beauty, that warmth, that golden sunlight, she feels she's in heaven. She could have just kept on walking into the light, right? She could have just kept on going, but she didn't. Instead, she started to pray because she knew that even in this moment of joy, there was something missing. And what was missing was her family, her kin, their freedom. She couldn't just be free alone. She knew that instantly. And so she got down into the ground on that free soil and she prayed to God. And I just love how she prayed. She's incredible. She believes intensely in this God. She thinks that her God is powerful beyond belief.
There's another story about prayer that pretty much floored me because from the perspective of someone like me in the 21st century who's never suffered anything like enslavement with all its violence, it could easily seem extreme to wish somebody dead. See, before she escaped, Harriet had been laid low in a cycle of repeated illnesses. Then she'd gotten wind that her enslaver, Edward Brodess, was planning to sell her or to send her further south as part of a chain gang. She prayed that Brodess would show her some mercy. And then, in her own words, I changed my prayer and I said, Lord, if you ain't never going to change that man's heart, kill him, Lord, and take him out of the way. Before that winter turned to spring, Edward Brodess was dead at age 47.
She's somebody who thinks that the God that she prays to is powerful enough and in tune with her enough to take the life of her owner.
Did she have a sense of like, oh, did I really mean it? Do I have that kind of power? Like, was she a little bit scared that it had happened?
Not only was she taken aback and in awe, but she actually was repentant. She was really scared about the power of her prayer because she thought she had made it happen. And he was to tell her that she hadn't. And so then she started to pray even more intensely. And what she prayed for was forgiveness. And she prayed for that master who had done her wrong to actually be redeemed. And this was a moment of greater expansiveness for her in terms of her spiritual life. Because the way it looks to me is that she sensed or she saw or she believed that through God, she had great power and that she must request the use of that power and wield that power carefully with humility. And she wants to be in close relationship with God in the right way. So after this happens, she does escape from slavery. The minute she escapes, she falls down to the ground and she prays. And she says to him, I'm going to go back and free all my people. And I need you to help me. So she basically is enlisting God in her purpose. I find this so fascinating, Tennery, because Tubman believed that she was working for God's purpose. She talked about how God wanted people to be free. She was following God's call and God's guidance. And maybe she was. But in this moment, it's Harriet Tubman who's asking for God to help her in her purpose, which is to free her family. She enters into a pact, which is she's going to free her people, and his part is to help her. And I do think that she felt that that pact was signed, it was sealed, and it was delivered because every other step she took in her life was based on this belief, I will free them, you will help me.
Our guest, Tiya Miles, grew up very close to the Ohio River. The Ohio would serve a critical function in the mid-1800s. It enabled the escape of other enslaved people. These people were a little further west from Harriet Tubman's operations. Tiya had an experience in childhood during the unusually cold winter of 1977 that would give her personally a taste of the conditions Harriet and these other enslaved people faced. The winter of 1977 felt a lot like the winters around 1850, which is when Harriet was leading her people north. Tiya remembers the mighty Ohio River freezing from shore to shore. When Constant Wonder returns in just a moment, I'm Tennery Taylor.
I'd like to introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, The Lisa Show, hosted by comedian, believer, and single mother Lisa Valentine Clark. The Lisa Show delves into most any challenge that meets us in the course of our lives, especially challenges in the realm of human relationships, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, or social issues. Lisa and her council of moms are willing to tackle it. Figuring life out is vexing enough without losing an ability to laugh or cry together or just plain talk things through. The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. We now return to Constant Wonder.
I want to go to the unusual winter of 1977. Can you tell me about your experience on the Ohio River?
This was a really ferocious winter, and it was a winter when the Ohio River froze over, which is very rare in our day. And my dad, because he is a very adventurous person, to put it mildly, decided he was going to take my sister and me out to the river because people were going out and they were walking on the river and they could walk far across the frozen waterway. And right across that river is the state of Kentucky. So they could actually cross state lines walking on the frozen river. And I remember it being so terrifying, but also just incredible and awe-inspiring at the same time. It was really scary to be walking on a surface that for your whole life you knew was liquid.
Awe is sometimes scary.
Oh, yeah. I think the two emotions go hand in hand. And it's funny, I was doing research looking into how frequently the Ohio River froze in the 1800s versus today. That's where I learned that it's very rare in our time. It's more common in the 19th century. And when I was doing that research, I came across articles that would say, only the old timers remember when the Ohio River froze. And I realized they're talking
That
about
makes
me.
you an old timer.
They're talking about me because I remember. When I was growing up close to the Ohio River, I didn't know how historically important it was. I didn't realize that it was the border between the free North and the slaveholding South. I just knew it was a waterway that we saw all the time, and that as a small girl, I got to walk on. Later in life, when I read Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved, which is based on the true story of Margaret Garner, an enslaved young woman from Kentucky who crossed the river and made it to Cincinnati and to Ohio, it wasn't until I read that novel that I realized this river is incredibly consequential, deeply symbolic, and I've grown up around it and going to it my whole life and didn't realize that if it had been 200 years ago, this river would have made the difference between my freedom and my enslavement. I actually learned not too long ago in doing my father's genealogy, which he wanted as a birthday gift because he was turning 80, that some of his ancestors were enslaved in Kentucky right across that river. So the river was critically important. The state of the river was crucial to whether or not people could escape. If the river is flowing and you can find somebody to help you or find a vessel, you could get a boat and go across it. If the river is frozen, you could try to cross it on foot. And the years when the river froze in the 1850s saw more people escaping because the water became like an ice bridge that they could just walk over. But we're talking about winter, talking about cold climates and storms and all kinds of dangers that come with winter weather, which is something that I also write about with regard to Harriet Tubman and her work in the decade of the 1850s, which is really her Underground Railroad period. This is a time when she's doing the things that we often picture her as doing. This is the time when she's leading people to freedom, navigating through those woods, reading the stars, walking along those waterways. This happened in the 1850s, and she chose the worst time of year and worst time of day to move because she said when people are in their houses, it's the safest time for her to get her groups to freedom. So she traveled through the winter. She traveled through the cold. She traveled through the dead of night.
I want to springboard off that to the rescue of her brothers because it occurred on Christmas Eve.
Yes.
Which is, again, this kind of smart, intuitive timing that she always had in mind.
Absolutely. Well, Harriet Tubman was absolutely devoted, dedicated, committed to bringing her family out of slavery. And she almost achieved it. There were two sisters who were sold. She couldn't get them and she couldn't get to all of their children, but she got most of her siblings. She got her parents. She brought cousins, so many people out of slavery. And a few years into her Underground Railroad decade, when she's getting more experience, she's tapping into more networks, she decides to go back and get those two brothers, right? Because she, she wasn't going to let it sit that they had decided to turn back. And she does it on Christmas Eve. She has laid a plan because she sends messages through people she knows she can rely on, especially in Baltimore. So her brothers were expecting her. She came and she met them. She actually hid in a corn crib for part of this time. And for those of you who have seen the film Harriet, this is one moment of the film that is accurate. I mean, we do have in the as told to biographies that Tubman said that her father, Ben Ross, who was himself a staunch Christian, her parents were both incredibly dedicated to their faith. He didn't want to have to lie. And so he did put a blindfold around his eyes because he knew that this escape was going to be happening so that he could truthfully say that he didn't see his sons escape. He didn't see anybody come to the farm. When in fact, he knew it was happening and he heard everything, but he didn't lie. So yes, Tubman brought her brothers to freedom. And what she was doing was bringing them to what really was a kind of sanctuary community that she was building on land that she purchased with the help of supporters in upstate New York. So she wasn't even just saying, I'm going to help free you and you're on your own. She was saying, I am preparing a place for you to come to.
I want to read your words back to you because I love this. You called this an intentional community of the redeemed.
Yes. And I use that language because Tubman had described slavery as hell. She had described the experience of being enslaved as the worst possible lives that people could live. So in many ways, those who were still in slavery were lost. And their redemption came from assisting them to their freedom because they wanted their freedom. They just needed help, just like she only needed a little bit of help from God.
On these expeditions, relying on God never meant failing to do her own part. So along with her firm expectation of divine help, Harriet also applied those shrewd skills she had acquired in childhood.
Every time Harriet Tubman went back into the South to free someone, she was putting her own freedom at risk. And the more people she freed, and the more known she became for freeing people, the more motivated others around her became to recapture her. There was a bounty on her head. The numbers fluctuate, and we don't have a source that tells us for certain how much it was. But it was thousands of dollars. Or one thing she believed was that God was with her and guiding her. And she seemed to feel that she had a shorthand, a really quick connector with God. And that is, she would have a thought and she would believe that was God. And I hope she also knew that she was a really smart woman. She knew how to read her environment, read the landscape, read social relations, notice who was where, take into account what they were doing, remember who was connected to who, and to apply that in moments of danger. One of the stories that is just really kind of ingenious for her mode of escape has to do with a return to Maryland. She's right there in plain sight, in plain view of somebody who she refers to as one of her masters. These are the people who had leased her. She knows that he will recognize her, and so she needs a distraction. She decides to hide in the role of an enslaved person. So she sees these chickens over there, and she kind of goes, among them, stirs them up, gets them fluttering and the, feathers flying, and picks a couple up and starts moving with them so that he will see her as just another enslaved woman who's out there tending chickens. So this is an example of her getting into the head of somebody else, imagining their psychology, and then partnering with animals, maybe in a way that she did with the piglets, similar to that, to get out of a tough scrape. And another one that I love that's similar to this, but in the opposite direction, Tennery, is when she's on a train. Again, she's on a rescue mission because she traveled, in all kinds of ways. Not just on foot, but also by boat, and also by train, and also by like a wagon-like conveyances. So she's on a train, and lo and behold, who does she see? Another one of her masters. And so she picks up a newspaper and pretends to read because she knows that he knows that the Harriet Tubman that he would remember cannot read. It is just an amazing ability to get into a role and start performing that role instantly that she displays on these escapes.
But she does sometimes give credit to God. You were saying that sometimes she felt like he put ideas into her head. I think there was once when she realized she remembered about a swamp.
Yes. All these stories that I'm telling, my interpretation of it is this is Tubman being brilliant. This is Tubman being an incredible actress. And I think those things are true. But I also think if we had Tubman with us right now and we asked her, that's not what she would say. She would say that the Lord led her, or God told her, or she knew in her spirit that was what she should do. So she would have a different interpretation and a different language for describing the motivation for her actions. We do have examples of her about her relationship with God and the presence of God during these escapes that allow us to see just a little bit more into her thinking. And one of those examples is, it's a very dramatic one. She was traveling with a party, a group of people. She's trying to lead them and to help them gain their freedom. And she got some bad news. And the news was that the person that she had sent to go look to see if there were any notices or advertisements for people in her party had come back and said, yes, there's a notice. These people's legal owners, their enslavers, their quote masters, are looking for them, and they're looking for them right on that road. So the danger was intense and the danger was real. And Tubman, well, I can't say she felt trapped. I don't think she felt trapped. If we were in Tubman's shoes, I think we would have felt trapped.
Oh, yeah. I would.
Yes,
I can say yes.
yes. But what she seems to have done is paused and listened for the voice of God in her head. She then knew that there was a place that they could go to. It's like she had a sudden memory that there's a certain swamp over there and that she should go to it, which didn't make any sense because it wasn't going in the right direction and the swamp wouldn't have been safe. But that's what she heard and that's what she did. And she led her party, this group, to this swampy area. And what should happen? But a Quaker was traveling through with his wagon, and happened to be there right at the exact time that they arrived at the swamp and was willing to help them out of this fix. An incredible story, which Tubman would say that was no accident, I'm sure.
One of these as told to biographers, Sarah Hopkins Bradford, she said that when Harriet was telling a story, Harriet would put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. What do you make of that gesture?
Yes. So Tubman certainly recognized that she was relying on these listeners and these interviewers and these writers to get her story down. She wanted it to be told for a few reasons. At first, she wanted it to be told so she could continue to raise money for her rescue missions. And then after the Civil War, she wanted her story to be told because she wanted to be able to support the sanctuary community. I mean, she was poor in the years following the Civil War, and people who came to her for help were even more poor than she. So she needed to have some kind of income. She decided she would, yes, tell her story and have it published. And she relied on helpers who had literacy skills. When she touched Sarah Bradford, knowing that Sarah Bradford was going to be writing for her, in a sense, Harriet Tubman seems to have wanted to transmit her true feelings or her true intentions, the words as she would want them to be relayed to Sarah Bradford. So she was using touch as emphasis or as almost an insurance policy in the hope that that would faithfully convey her message.
So we started this episode, Tiya, with you admonishing us not to think of Harriet Tubman as kind of a comic superhero, that she's a real person. And you've walked us through like examples of her ingenuity, of her bravery, and illustrated for us her really rich spiritual life. So given all of that, what lessons would you like listeners to take away from this episode? What can we apply to our own lives and be a little more like her?
She was brilliant intellectually and also spiritually and emotionally. One of the critical aspects that we can take from looking at her example is she had faith in a power larger than herself. She worked with people, and she worked with all kinds of people, but she didn't necessarily trust that the people around her, or even she herself, were going to be the ones to solve the problems. She looked to God, and she believed that God was leading her where she needed to go. Our takeaway, I think, is to look for a higher, a larger purpose and focus our attention on that.
How are you different, Tiya, after having done all of this research? Are you inspired by her in ways that maybe you're a little different?
I'm so inspired by her. I realize that she is someone with so many dimensions, it would be impossible to fully know her. She was someone who lived on the earth, just like we do, but also who lived through her dreams. And I admire that so much. It resonates with me having a rich dream life. And now I take my dreams more seriously and I consider how they might be giving me information about what's going on in my life. I have had a number of dreams across my life that include recurring scenes. And one of these has to do with my beloved grandmother who died around 20 years ago. I miss her so much. I adore her. And in my dreams, she's present. Sometimes she talks to me, sometimes she doesn't. And I typically would have thought of this dream series as a creation of my own mind because I miss her. And perhaps it is, probably it is. But Harriet Tubman's rich dream life gave her information that she actually applied. And it's something that I feel is worth thinking about. How can we apply what we see in our dreams, no matter the source? I also really admire the ways in which she chose hard paths. She chose the hard path again and again. She wasn't trying to, have every day be a beautiful summer day, full of blooms where she could skip through the flowers. That was not her environment. It wasn't her circumstance. And I also think that that wasn't her mentality or her frame of mind. She recognized that the world presents us with grave challenges, and she was willing to take on the extreme difficulties required of her. I admire that, and I strive now to be the same way. I hope we all can.
Tiya Miles is a professor of history at Harvard and the author of Night Flyer, Harriet Tubman, and the Faith Dreams of a Free People. If you want to hear the episode from back in 2025 that also involved the Leonid meteor shower, search for the Constant Wonder episode titled The Cutting Edge of Tradition, Black Folk Art Reimagined. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by me with help from Mimi Teeples, sound designed by Gracie Smith. Constant Wonder is a production of BYU Radio.
Just like the tree planted by the water.